On May the 16th, nearly a month ago, the AEU, the Victorian branch of the Teachers Union, announced another 4-year sellout agreement on wages and conditions. For members of the Committee for Public Education and readers of the World Socialist website, this was no surprise. It confirms what we have consistently warned, that the union apparatus doesn't defend educators. In fact, it functions to impose the dictates of the government and the corporate elite. For 10 months, negotiations with the Allen Labor government were conducted in secret. Throughout this period, the CFPE warned that the AEU was preparing another betrayal, just as it did in 2022 and the previous agreements decades before. The 2026 betrayal that is now on the table in the form of a in-principle agreement is and educators are now being asked to vote for it without proper and genuine discussion taking place and through a thoroughly anti-democratic process. The CFPE, as Will has said, calls for the widest possible rejection of this deal through a decisive no vote and for the immediate formation of independent rank and file committees. Educators must take control of this struggle and unite with broader sections of the working class facing real wage cuts, job losses under Labor's austerity agenda at both state and federal levels. But we must be clear, a no vote alone is not enough. What is required is an independent political and broad industrial struggle, a break with the union apparatus, Labor and their politics that has led us to this point. This sellout, as Will has said, is not a mistake nor a one-off tactical misstep. It is the continuation of decades of betrayals by union and Labor. The AEU doesn't function as a fighting organisation. Its role is to manage, contain, and ultimately impose government policy. Now, the March 24 strike demonstrated the strength and determination of educators. More than 40,000 teachers, ES staff and principals walked out, the first statewide strike in 13 years, after a 98 or 97% vote for industrial action. The strike expressed deep anger over collapsing conditions, unmanageable workloads and declining real wages. It drew broad support from parents and other workers. But even before the strike took place, the AEU leadership had moved to shut it down. On March the 20th, 4 days before the strike, the union executive passed a resolution to replace unified action with fragmented regional half-day stoppages and ineffectual bans. The March 24 strike itself was structured to let off steam, not to advance a genuine fight. Nor did the bureaucracy led by Justin Mullally, sitting on a $250,000 salary, ever intend to win the 35% claim or secure the conditions educators need. The strike was to provide a facade of militancy while maintaining control over the growing opposition and for recruitment purposes to the union. At the rally, Mullally and ACTU Secretary Sally McManus chanted union power while refusing to call for a unified national strike, despite teachers striking in Tasmania the same day. The greatest fear was a movement that would break out of the control of the bureaucracy and link up independently across state borders. In early May, the Allen government began leaking claims of a 28% wage offer. The AEU maintained a calculated silence over this, issuing evasive communications and withholding the real state of the negotiations. Then on May the 6th, the AEU abruptly cancelled even limited industrial action, citing, quote, intensive negotiations. This cancellation was carried out via an 8 a.m. email to teachers without proper consultation, just as broader struggles were emerging among Melbourne council workers, Victorian public health workers, and teachers and educators in Canberra. The union feared the dispute would connect with a broader working class movement and pose a political crisis for both the Allan and Albanese governments. At the same time, the union intensified censorship, deleting critical comments from social media, restricting discussion. This was repeating the methods they used to push through the 2022 agreement, which was an utter betrayal. So what is in this deal? The AEU, backed by the government and the media, is promoting a headline wage increase of 28.3% to 32.4% over 4 years. This is deeply misleading. In real terms, the agreement represents a continuation of wage decline. An average increase of around 29.7% over 4 years equates to roughly 6.7 to 7% annually. This is being offered under conditions of inflation running at 4.6% in the 12 months to March 2026 and rising towards 6%. With interest rates, housing costs, rent, food, fuel, and basic expenses continuing to increase, driven by the criminal US-Israeli war against Iran, any nominal rise that fails to outpace real inflation amounts to a pay cut. There is no cost of living adjustment, no inflation indexing. Educators are now being locked, if they agree to this, into fixed increases without living cost rises. The agreement does nothing to recover what has already been lost, and since 2021, teachers have suffered a real wage cut of around 10% under the 2022 agreement. This agreement does not reverse that decline, it merely continues it. For education support staff, the situation is even worse. ES workers are already among the lowest paid and most exploited, and they are being offered a one-off allowance instead of permanent wage increases. This allowance is supposedly linked to, quote, professional responsibilities and student duty of care. That is a complete insult. ES staff support students with disabilities, behavioural needs, and complex learning requirements under immense pressure. Instead of proper funding and staffing, the government offers a temporary payment to inflate the headline figure. On workload, the AEU claims that agreement contains what they call workload wins. This is false too. There are no caps on class sizes, the central driver of workload burnout, staff shortages, and educational outcomes. Class size is one of the most basic and urgent demands in public education because it directly shapes the increasingly complex daily reality in the classroom. Administrative burdens remain unchecked and only a vague, quote, consultation provisions that impose no limits. Meeting requirements remain essentially unchanged. There is no guaranteed minimum planning time during school hours, which adds to the chronic pressure of hours of unpaid overtime continues. That's estimated to be about 12 hours every week of unpaid work. The increase in student-free days from the government is cost-free. It doesn't resolve the problem. It doesn't address overcrowded classrooms, insufficient staffing, or the exhausting volume of work on a daily basis. There is no funded commitment to hire the additional teachers and ES staff required to resolve the staffing crisis. And last year, Monash University research, which we'll refer to, shows Australian teachers are already working 50 to 60 hours a week, with high levels of stress and widespread mental health impacts. Burnout is rampant. Thousands are leaving, and the agreement does nothing to halt that exodus. Embedded, and this is significant, embedded within the agreement is a no strike clause. This locks educators into a 4-year deal expiring in 2030 and removes the ability to take protected industrial action for that time. Under Australia's enterprise bargaining laws introduced under the Keating Labor government and upheld by the unions, industrial action is only legally protected during narrow bargaining periods. A multi-year agreement, which is what this is, neutralises the right to strike for years. This is critical. So what about the ratification process? It is designed from top to bottom to deliver a yes vote while maintaining the appearance of members' democracy. This is not a one member, one vote ballot. Delegates cast one vote per 20 members after sub-branch meetings. The AEU controls the database. The AEU announces the outcome. There are no rank and file scrutineers, and there's no way members can actually verify the vote. At a recent Melbourne briefing, AEU officials ruled out a CFPE resolution attempted to be moved by Will. They moved it out of order on the pretext that no one was formally chairing the meeting. Online sessions have had the chat functions disabled, participants muted, and sessions abruptly shut down. The union has even blocked online attendance at regional meetings, and this clearly has an impact in, country areas in particular. A sellout of this scale cannot be imposed democratically. It must be managed, censored, and insulated from scrutiny. That's what the AEU is doing. Now, the central question is, why is this taking place? Why do government, state and federal insist there's no money for public education, no money for proper wages and decent conditions, and that what they call budgetary restraint is unaffordable? As Will went through, governments do have priorities. Nothing in this agreement can be understood outside the broader political program being carried out. The issue is not a lack of resources, but how these resources are allocated and in whose interests. The Labor Party federally under Albanese and in Victoria under Allen is implementing a unified agenda. Money for the corporate elite and the military apparatus, and austerity at home against the working class. These are not separate policies, they are deeply interconnected. As Will said, the claim there is no money for public education is totally false. The Albanese government is overseeing the largest military build-up since World War II. Military spending has reached nearly 60 billion annually. This has been accompanied by historic attacks on disability support, the NDIS, such as a $35 billion cut, and other social spending. The government's own figures show $114 billion cut for social programs since 2022, with another $63.8 billion in cuts planned. So what about public education funding? Public schools are being systematically starved of funds. Federal funding for public schools is set to grow by just 4.1% in 2026 and 2027. This is below inflation. Meanwhile, funding for private and religious schools, overwhelmingly serving wealthier families, will grow by 19.3% over the next 4 years. Over the past decade, private school funding per student has grown by 43% in real terms. This is a direct transfer of public resources away from the working class students and into elite private schools. It reflects the class priorities of the Labor government. In the 2026-27 federal budget, this also includes substantial cuts. The student engagement and wellbeing program has been slashed from $4 billion to $1 billion, eliminating access to psychologists, counsellors and essential support services. Disability funding in schools has been cut by $417 million, while $40.4 million is allocated to compliance and auditing. The National Teacher Workforce Action Plan, supposedly a response to the staffing crisis, will be reduced to $17.6 million by 2029-30. This is not solving the crisis, but obscuring it. At the same time, as we've stressed, the NDIS is being gutted, an assault on the most vulnerable sections of the working class. At least 160,000 people will be removed and over 300,000 when those blocked from entering are included. These students do not disappear when funding is cut. They arrive at school every day without support, entering overstretched classrooms that lack staffing, disability loadings and special services. The burden falls on teachers and ES staff already under extreme pressure. Public schools already have around 200,000 students with special needs not receiving any funding at all. That's the daily reality that this agreement completely ignores. Now, the Victorian context. This process that I've outlined in relationship to federal funding is not just confined to the federal government. In Victoria, the same patterns are evident, and the union has played a central role in enforcing it through sellout agreements. Of the last 26 years in Victoria, 22 of them have been under a state Labor government. The Allen government is prioritising the demands of financial markets over public education while claiming budget surpluses, and at the same time it has secretly shelved $2.4 billion in promised school funding until 2031. This leaves per student funding one of the lowest nationally. As state debt rises, the cost is being imposed on educators, public sector workers through job losses, wage cuts and worsening conditions. The AEU agreement, like other unions, are the mechanisms through which this assault is imposed. The union bureaucracy is an organisation not representing educators but the government. It operates in partnership with the government to police its agenda, and this relationship has been openly acknowledged. After the 2022 sellout deal, the AEU invited the then Premier Daniel Andrews to address its state conference. Andrews thanked the union, stating, quote, "The success and prosperity of the state rely on you," end of quote. That was an open acknowledgement of the union's role in enforcing government policy. This is the political reality. The Labor Party, federally and every state, is an unalloyed representative of business and financial capital. It's not a party of reform that can be pressured or pushed leftward. Now, the sellout has produced, as all teachers are on this call meeting know, teachers and ES know, the sellout has produced an eruption of opposition. Thousands are taking to social media and attended briefings to express anger and opposition to the betrayal. This rebellion is part of a broader development in the international working class. That's what Will went through at the beginning of the meeting. What is emerging in Victoria is not some isolated protest, but one expression of growing opposition against war, austerity, and the degradation of public services and unbearable conditions in workplaces around the world. The decisive question is, how is this opposition to be developed? Now, two pseudo-left tendencies aligned with the AEU have intervened, both calling for a no vote, but straitjacketing that no vote within the AEU apparatus. One is aligned with Socialist Alternative and Victorian Socialists, and they're operating under the banner Socialists in Schools. And the other is linked to the Solidarity Group, and they call themselves Fight the Crisis. And they contested the AEU for the AEU leadership in 2024, and that group is led by long-time radical Lucy Honan. Both present themselves as militant opponents of the deal, but their political perspective is neither socialist or directed towards mobilising educators independently of the union apparatus. On the contrary, it's aimed at keeping opposition confined within it. The campaigns function not as an alternative to the AEU bureaucracy, but as a safety valve for mounting anger. Socialists in Schools argue that the problem is simply that the bureaucrats have not taken sufficient industrial action. Its leaflets, strike handbooks and so on call for more strikes, more meetings, increased AEU recruitment and more tough bargaining with Labor. The underlying perspective is greater militancy, pressure, particularly in an election year. They believe that you can force Labor to concede a better deal. But of course, this leaves untouched the role of the union apparatus itself. A central plank, one of the things that they continually promote is the promotion of the Australian Nurses Midwifery Federation's 28.4% wage outcome. They say this is the model that we need to follow. And this is completely false. The headline figures of 28% are spread over multiple years, just like the teachers. A substantial portion of that deal flowed not from enterprise bargaining, but from a separate Fair Work Commission, gender equity and work value determination. For most classifications of nurses, increases were approximately 5% in 2024, 4.2% in 2025, 4.1% in 2026, and 12%, which hasn't come, in 2026, which was largely as a result of the Fair Work decision. Even then, the increases largely offset previous wage losses, fundamental issues, understaffing, excessive workload, burnout, all of these things that nurses confront just like educators. By presenting this as a model, and similarly they glorify the wages and conditions in New South Wales schools, Socialists in Schools promote the illusion that sufficient pressure within the union can extract major concessions. In reality, unions like the ANMF, the Nurses Union, the New South Wales Teachers Federation and the AEU operate within the same industrial and political framework, collaborating with governments to contain disputes. And in later part of the meeting, a member of the CFPE from New South Wales will actually speak on the situation there and expose what exactly is the situation in New South Wales. Fight the Crisis advances a slightly different version of the same perspective. Its central aim is that a no vote will, quote, empower our negotiators to demand better. This rests on the assumption that the AEU bureaucracy can be pressured into securing a fundamentally different outcome. Teachers are urged to leverage the government's desire for industrial stability before the November state election, and they warn that the alternative could be Liberal or right-wing government, including One Nation, will be worse. Now, this is the logic of lesser evil policies. It accepts Labor as the only framework, diverting attention from the fact that it's the Labor government that are implementing the cuts. The call to, quote, empower our negotiators raises a basic question. Why should educators trust the same officials who cancelled strikes, suppressed dissent, restricted meetings, and negotiated behind closed doors? If a no vote simply returns the same apparatus to negotiations, the outcome will not fundamentally change. The issue is not the effort or tactics of individual leaders, but the role the union plays in enforcing government policy. Fight the Crisis own record underscores this. In the 2024 AEU election campaign, it didn't characterise the 2022 agreement as a betrayal. And of course, this reflects its orientation towards them hoping that they will take over the existing structure so they don't want to challenge any of its functions. Now, what unites both these tendencies is their role as a loyal opposition within the AEU. Neither calls for a break from the AEU apparatus. Both oppose independent rank and file committees. Neither advance unifying educators across state lines, despite parallel disputes in Tasmania, Queensland, and the ACT. Nor do they propose linking up with other workers in struggle, council workers, health workers, early childhood educators. Instead, they present the dispute as a contained, state-based industrial issue that can be resolved by pressure politics. Under deepening austerity, rising living costs, and escalating global conflict, this perspective promotes the illusion that limited industrial action can reverse the cuts. It also rests on the falsification of other past struggles, particularly the 2022 agreement. That wasn't a mistake, but it was a conscious betrayal. It was imposed through misinformation, censorship, suppression of dissent, with oppositional voices marginalised, and the deal pushed through despite substantial rank and file resistance. As we said in a recent article on the pseudo lefts, we said the real political dynamic and relationship is that the Labor government imposes the attacks on the interests of the corporate elite, the union bureaucracy enforces those attacks, and the pseudo left confuses, misdirects, and contains opposition among workers. Now, what's the way forward? The CFPE calls on all educators to vote no. A no vote is not simply a rejection of inadequate numbers. It is a rejection of the entire political process. Secret negotiation, censored opposition, manufactured silence, and the bureaucracy that cancels strikes at the moment they are becoming effective. It is an assertion that educators will not be managed, pacified, or sold out again. But a no vote, as we've stressed, is not sufficient. The AEU demonstrated in 2022 that they can ram through these agreements even with a 40% no. The union controls information, meeting structures, social media, and the legal framework of enterprise bargaining. A no vote must be accompanied by organised, independent political action, unifying sections of the broader working class who are coming forward to fight nationally but internationally. Now that means building rank and file committees in every school, controlled by educators themselves, democratic organisations independent of the union apparatus. To take this forward, the CFPE suggests fighting for some of the following demands. Organise opposition to the sellout and share information freely. Connect schools, regions, nationally to overcome the AEU's deliberate fragmentation. Unite all school staff, union and non-union, early childhood educators, health workers and other public sector workers facing the same assault. Fight for an immediate 40% pay increase to recover past losses with salaries indexed to inflation and automatic cost of living adjustments. Demand maximum class sizes of 15 to 20. End administrative burden so teachers can focus on teaching. Secure a minimum of 8 hours weekly during school hours for planning, assessment and collaboration. Abolish NAP plan and other regressive testing that narrows the curriculum and end the authoritarian imposition of mandatory teaching methods. Hire thousands of teachers and support staff to end punishing workloads. Employ at least it's probably not enough. One full-time ES worker per class, including health workers and psychologists for every school, and re-employ experienced educators who have been driven out of the profession because of the appalling conditions. Fully fund support services for all students, including those with diverse needs. Oppose the militarisation of education and defend educators and students victimised for opposing genocide and war, and initiate a high-quality school construction program in working class communities, end public funding for elite private schools and invest billions in public education for a free first-class education for all, and link with the International Workers' Alliance of rank-and-file committees to connect this struggle internationally. Now, this is not simply an industrial dispute. It's a political struggle over social priorities. Educators have already shown, not just in Victoria, but internationally now, strikes are taking place, indefinite threats of strikes in Turkey, in Mexico, the United States. They've all shown their willingness to fight. But the decisive task now is to build organisations and a leadership capable of carrying that struggle forward. The defence of public education requires a socialist perspective. The resources exist to provide high-quality schools and decent paying conditions, but they are being monopolised by the billionaires, banks and corporations. These resources must be placed under public ownership and democratic control and redirected to meet social need, not private profit.